Hi there, welcome back and welcome to a standalone video. Today I am making this. So this is the big piece. It is a photo etch set made by Maritime Models and Neil over at Maritime Models has been kind enough to send me one so that I can construct it for you today. Now this comes in two different sizes. You can either get this, which is 1 to 100 scale, or you can get this, which is 1 to 200 scale. The same scale, incidentally, as the Trumpeter Titanic model that I made recently. Here is the finished article, and over the course of the video I will be showing you how I built it and how I weathered it. And I'll also say a little thing about what I think about the set as well at the end. So, without any further ado, let's crack on. So, first of all, what is the big piece? Well, the big piece is the largest ever portion of Titanic to be raised from the seabed. When it was on the ship, it made up part of the starboard side and it made up two cabins on C deck and extended all the way down to D deck. It weighs about 20 tonnes and it's about 7 odd metres by 4 metres, so it's a sizable portion of Titanic's hull plating. It's unclear when it broke away from the wreck, probably during the breakup, but it could also have broken away when the ship impacted the bottom. One attempt was made to raise this piece in 1996, but the part was actually raised to about 60 metres below the surface when some of the lines holding it failed and the part sank back into the depths. So you could probably call this part the only part of Titanic ever to sink twice. Anyway, a successful attempt was made a couple of years later in 1998 to raise the part, and this resulted in its recovery. It then spent a couple of years in a laboratory being stabilised, having the rust sort of stabilised as far as it could be. And ever since then, it has been on display in Las Vegas. And you can probably tell by my voice what I think about that. Not much. I mean, Las Vegas, you know, it's got no relationship with Titanic whatsoever. It's got no relationship with the White Star Line. It's not even near the sea. I mean, you know, you could make a case for this being in New York, but let's be honest, the real place for this is Belfast. But proof as ever that money is the driving force behind these things. Anyway, I digress. So what I'm doing here is I am sanding with a fairly light emery cloth all of the mating surfaces of the brass photo etch. Now the reason I'm doing this is because by sanding it you give the glue that you're going to use a far better chance to actually stick effectively. What you're actually doing here is you're increasing the surface area that the glue has to sort of stick two parts together. And ultimately this will make glue perform far better in the long term. It also cleans the part and, you know, gets rid of any sort of contaminants or whatever that you might have introduced. The next step is to cut out the two major parts of the big piece with a very sharp craft knife on a very sort of spongy chopping board, modelling board, whatever you want to call it. And then I'm just lining up the parts before gluing. Now, to hold these parts in place while I glue, I've done this in two stages, but I used just a very small strip of masking tape, and that just holds the two parts in place while I glue one side. As you can see here, I'm just applying some pressure as the glue sets. And then it's a simple case of removing the masking tape and repeating the process on the other side, as so. I'm using a relatively slow-acting CA glue here, and this just allows me to use my spreader to spread the glue across all areas of the mating surfaces so I can get as much glue and as much contact area as possible, just to make sure that this part really is, you know, really solid, because this is the base of the whole model. Now, the big piece has a little bend in it, perhaps from when the ship's hull plating was buckling under the stress of the sinking. So what I did was I just rolled the part over the shaft of my craft knife, just to impart a nice sort of uniform bend before I went any further. I should just say at this point, by the way, that I'm not just making this up on the fly. I am actually, in fact, following the instructions, which you can find online on Maritime Models' website. As you would expect from anything from Maritime Models, the instructions are cracking. They're very clear, supported with pictures, just what you want. Now, for me, this is the most enjoyable part of the model, was adding the additional hull plating. So again, I'm using a relatively slow-acting CA glue, getting all of the mating surface covered with glue before adding on the hull plate. And this is one of the large doubler sections with absolutely beautiful rivet detail. I'll show you a still image in just a second, but the rivet detail here is absolutely gorgeous. Really has that, you know, industrial heavy plate look to it. Here, just adding another plate, same process again, making sure glue covers all of the areas, making sure that I've trimmed off any nubs before sticking the part down. So now I will show you just a quick close-up of the part. So here we are, so far so good, and isn't that absolutely gorgeous? I mean, the rivet detail, the 3D effect with the two plates and stuff, really, really looks the business. Next, I'm doing the doubling plates on the inside of the model. So this is the part of the ship that would have been lined with the luxurious cabin interiors and such. Just a note, something to be careful about here. These parts do have an up and a down to them. The easiest way to do this is to, make sure you just check in the instructions. But what you'll find is that the riveting seam lines follow on from each other. So as long as these are lined up properly, the chances are you've got the part the right way around. But just something to be aware of. There is an up and a down to these things. And I say this just because I very nearly made that mistake, having cut something out, gone away to do something else, didn't quite check properly, and very nearly stuck something in the wrong way round. So, something to watch out for. The next job was to add the ribs to the part, and this is one of the things that I really enjoyed about this build. You really get a sense of how a ship is built, because you can see the ribs and how they're sort of spaced along the hull sections, and then you can see how the hull plates are riveted onto those ribs, and then you can see how the hull plates are reinforced with doubling plates and so on. You really get an idea of how a ship is actually built. It's really quite interesting. Anyway, the ribs are sort of like large I sections or C sections, and so because of that I am using my photo etch bending tool to bend them up into the correct shape, and then it's a simple case of sticking them down, making sure that you put the right rib on the right section, because each rib is subtly different in how it's been ripped apart or twisted or bent. So as with everything, check the instructions, make sure you put the right rib on the right section of big piece. So the next rib coming along now. Now, if you have looked at the instructions for this already, you'll notice that I'm actually doing this slightly out of order, because the instructions say to add the portholes before you do the ribs. The reason I haven't done that is because I want to weather the portholes differently to the rest of the kit. The portholes will have been made of brass, so they won't have rusted, they'll have tarnished, whereas the remainder of the part will all have been steel, which will have rusted and oxidised quite heavily. So I want to do two different techniques when I'm weathering these, and it seems more logical to have them separated, weather them, and then glue them in at the last minute. So that's why I'm slightly deviating from the instructions. Anyway, on with the ribs, and this is very much a case of rinse and repeat. Cut out a rib, bend it, stick it down, next one, next one, next one, working your way along the part. As you can see there, I've also just installed a piece of wall which separates off one of the cabins from a lavatory. Quite remarkable that this is actually still part of the big piece to this day. One of the nice little bits of detail here is that on part of this wall there's actually some holes where the decay has eaten through the much thinner internal walls, which would of course been far less heavy plate than the hull plating. A really, really nice little detail there. In this clip I am adding a section of flooring that, again, quite remarkably managed to hold on to the piece during the sinking. Another lovely little bit of detail that I'd like to draw your attention to here is the sort of exposed rivet holes where rivets would have once been, which have then come out subsequently. The next job I'm doing, and this is a job that I would do with anything I'm going to paint which is made of metal, is I'm painting it with a metal primer called Metal Prep 4K. There'll be a link in the description to it, but essentially this is a primer like any other type of primer. Metal is very, very smooth, and it doesn't make a very, very good surface for paint to adhere to. So this is, I think, a sort of plastic-based product, but you paint it over a metal surface and it gives paint a far better surface to adhere onto. Makes your paint job last far longer. A little word on painting. I'm going to paint this as if it's just been brought up from the depths of the ocean. So my big piece is going to be very, very rusty. But you could do whatever you wanted here. Because of where it was located on the ship, the big piece would actually have had a portion of black hull paint. It would also have had the yellow shear line stripe, and then it also had a bit of the white superstructure paint as well. So you could do it as it was when Titanic existed as a ship over 100 years ago, or you could paint it as it is preserved now in Las Vegas. There's quite a few options here. So before I go on with the rust effect, I'm going to give this an undercoat in a very, very deep brown. So what I've done here is I've actually made a colour out of combining pitch black with a very dark brown, and this gives me a really, really deep brown, almost just like an off black, but it gives a nice sort of semi-rust base, nice and dark, but not pure black. And this will be a nice place to sort of start and to build up my rust effects from. So I'm applying this with an airbrush as I normally would. A few coats. The critical thing here, as always, is to do a coat, leave it, let it dry, and then come back and do another one. 5 very light coats are better than 1 extremely heavy one. Right, in order to turn this into this, I've used a set called U-Rust. Now this was not an inexpensive thing, but it's a really, really cool set, and frankly I have been waiting for an opportunity to use it for months and months and months. What it is, basically, is a set of chemicals which react together to form actual rust. So this is the sort of USP of this set. This is not an effect, it's actual rust. So for example, this is the actual product that I used on my big piece. And essentially what this is powdered iron. And when you mix it with water, you end up with this gorgeous sort of like rusty paste, which you can then paint on your model. And of course, because it is actual rust, it's actual iron oxide, it looks the bee's knees. It really does look accurate. So this is a fantastic set, and I won't go into too much depth because it's fairly straightforward, but I do hope to use it more in the future. But you get lots of different effects. So there's a product called Deep Oxide, which gives you quite a sort of 3D, quite sort of aggressive rust effect, as you can see here. Then you've got other type of oxide, brown oxide, for a slightly deeper rust. Then you've got the rust that I used. This perhaps gives you a slightly lower, toned down effect. And the reason I used the one that I used is because this is a very, very scaled down part. This is 1 to 100 scale. So I don't want massive clumps of rust in the way that some of the other products would have given that. I wanted a very, very flat rust effect. And that's exactly what I've got. There's still texture on this, hopefully, as you can see. But it doesn't look over the top. So that's kind of what I was after. But there's lots of other things as well. There's also a sort of copper rusting effect, a copper sort of sulfating effect, which I'm looking forward to trying. Anyway, that's what I used. Interesting kit, and something which I hope to use more often in the future. So here you go. As you can see, I have mixed my iron powder with a little bit of water, and I'm then just using an old paintbrush to paint that, I should say, all over the part. And over the next few hours, this will oxidize and form a rust-like coating. The actual U-Rust set comes with a couple of different chemicals called Reactor 1 and Reactor 2, and they are means of causing the rust to occur perhaps a bit quicker. But I actually found when using this product in particular, this very, very fine powdered iron, I find that you don't really need it. I find that it actually rusts perfectly happily just in the presence of water. Yep, I'll finish painting all this on, let it rust for a bit, and then if needs be I will come back and do a bit more later, just build up the layers, you know. So there you go, that's the part covered in iron oxide, and as if by magic, leaving it overnight to dry. that is the rusted result. And it's something I'm really, really happy with. I think it looks really, really good. And as I say, one of the things I really like about this particular effect is that it has a bit of texture to it, but it's not so over the top that you're sort of hiding the rivet detail or anything like that. I think weathering, generally, is one of the most sort of satisfying and enjoyable parts of building a model, but it's also very, very easy to do too much. The line between the perfect amount of weathering and a little bit too much is incredibly narrow. So, very happy with this. The next step is to add the portholes. Now, initially for the portholes, I used a sort of black wash and added that on the top. But the result was, it was all right, but I thought really they still looked a bit too clean. This stuff's been under the sea for 80, 90 years. You're not really going to see any shiny brass at all. It's going to look pretty sort of dark brown, quite deeply tarnished. So what I did instead was I went back and I actually did a paint of very flat brown, and this gave the impression of, a nice smooth surface, so not something that had rusted and flaked, but nonetheless was very heavily tarnished. Now, unfortunately, I didn't film any of this, but I'll show you some close-ups instead. So there you go. As you can see, the brown it still looks pretty heavily weathered, but it does just serve to separate the portholes and show them as brass instead of steel. The detail on these portholes is fantastic. It even goes as far as the locking mechanisms. You've got the little hand screws that you would use to actually screw the portholes down. Detail's fantastic. Now, 3 of the 4 portholes on the big piece also have glass in them. And so I've recreated that by cutting out some very thin, clear plastic to the diameter of the portholes, and then cutting some very deep grooves in them with a sharp craft knife. And I've done this as truly as possible to photos of the big piece. So I've tried to make the glass look as accurate as I possibly could to what you would see in the big piece if you viewed it today in a museum. And here's another photo from the front. And when you think about it, quite remarkable really that glass survives in these portholes after the violence of the sinking of the ship. So there you go, that is Maritime Models' big piece. And what do I think about it? Well, I think it's a cracking little kit actually. As I've already said, I really love how you can see the way that the ship was built up. I really love that kind of the ribs and the hull doublers and stuff like that, and the rivet detail is just exquisite. But I also think as a kit in its own right, it's great. It probably took me all in about 2 days. I think the assembly took me about 3-4 hours, and depending on what you're doing, it may take you a little bit more or a little bit less time. And then the paint job, painting, letting it dry, that took the remaining day and a half. So it was a nice little kit, and I think it's great for any sort of Titanic enthusiast. It really looks the part. It's clearly part of Titanic. The sort of the scope for doing different things. As I say, I depicted mine fresh out the ocean, but you could depict it as it was on the brand new Titanic. You could depict it as it is realised now in a museum. It's quite a versatile little kit. The detail is fabulous. The instructions are really, really strong. I always think Maritime Models instructions are very clear, supported by pictures, but they are very, very straightforward to follow. So that's absolutely top notch. But I think the application I can really see for this kit is if you're the kind of person that is fairly new to modelling and you're not sure if you want to get involved with photo etch, or maybe you're not sure if you have the skills to do it yet, or maybe you're just not sure that you can really bear to sort of part with the amount of money photo etch costs you. This is a fantastic little kit to sort of cut your teeth on, because it involves all of the skills in working with photo etch. It involves cutting, bending, folding, gluing, sanding, weathering, painting. This is a miniaturized version of how you will work with photo etch on any model. So if you're a bit uneasy about it, if you're not sure you've got the skills or whatever, this is a fantastic kit to start out with, to see if you enjoy it, to see if to see if you take to it. So for that reason, I think it's brilliant. So yeah, fantastic little kit. It looks cracking on display. Mine's going to go on display next to my trumpeter model of the Titanic. And yeah, thank you very much, Neil, for sending it to me. For those interested in my next project, I'm going to be releasing a video in the coming weeks on my new project, but the model I am making is actually in my house now. I've bought the model and it has been delivered, so I'll be introducing that very soon. So it only remains for me now to say thanks very much for watching. Thank you very much, Neil, for sending me this wonderful little kit, and I will see you in the next one. Bye for now.